I rubbed my tired eyes, staring at the screen of my old laptop. It was almost 2 a.m., but I couldn't stop scrolling through job postings. The apartment was silent, except for the occasional creak of the old radiator. In the next room, Emily, my 5-year-old daughter, was sound asleep. I glanced at her closed door and felt a pang of guilt for staying up so late. But I couldn't afford to rest. Not now. The small apartment we lived in was a far cry from the life we once had. After the divorce, I'd had to sell our 2-bedroom condo downtown to pay off the debts my ex-husband had racked up. He had left me with nothing but heartbreak and bills. Now Emily and I lived in a cramped 1-bedroom rental on the outskirts of Chicago. Every day felt like a struggle to keep our heads above water. I scrolled past dozens of postings, most were underpaid or completely out of reach. But then I saw it. Full-time nanny needed for a 7-year-old boy. Live-in position, salary, $4,500 per month. My heart skipped a beat. The pay was nearly 3 times what I made as an office assistant, a job I'd been clinging to for the past 2 years. The work wasn't fulfilling, but it kept the lights on. I clicked on the listing and read through the details. Experience with children? Check. College degree? Check. Fluency in English? Obviously. But then I saw the line that made my heart race. Applicants with their own children may be considered. Could this really be my chance? Without thinking twice, I typed up a reply, attached my resume, and hit send. As the email vanished into the ether, I exhaled, half expecting nothing to come of it. But just as I was about to shut my laptop, my phone buzzed on the table. I grabbed it, squinting at the screen. An unfamiliar number. "Hello," I answered, my voice shaky. A professional-sounding woman introduced herself as Sarah, the assistant to Mr. Michael Severin, the employer from the job posting. She said they wanted to interview me the next morning at 11 a.m. I could hardly believe it. I stammered out a polite confirmation, and she hung up after promising to text me the address. When the message came through, I stared at the location. Lincoln Park. A beautiful, upscale neighborhood I hadn't set foot in since my old life. It felt like a different world. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My thoughts were a tangle of hope and fear. What if this job was the break I desperately needed? What if it was the chance to give Emily and me a fresh start? Morning couldn't come fast enough. That night, I spent hours researching Michael Smith, the man behind the job posting. His name appeared in countless articles as a tech entrepreneur who had built a fortune through innovative startups. The profiles described him as a relentless worker who, following the death of his wife 3 years earlier, had poured himself entirely into his business ventures. His young son had reportedly been left mostly in the care of nannies during this time. The next morning, after dropping Emily off at daycare, I focused on preparing for the interview. My wardrobe was limited, but I selected a black pencil skirt, a crisp white blouse, and a pair of comfortable low-heeled shoes. I pulled my hair into a neat bun and applied minimal makeup, aiming for a professional and polished appearance. The address led me to an elegant 3-story mansion tucked behind a tall iron fence in one of Chicago's most affluent neighborhoods. The house radiated quiet sophistication, its manicured lawn and grand architecture standing out even among the other impressive homes nearby. I arrived on time and was greeted at the gate by a composed woman named Sarah, who introduced herself as Mr. Smith's assistant. She escorted me inside, leading me to a spacious office on the first floor. The office was immaculate and professional, with dark wood shelves filled with books, a sleek modern desk, and large windows that bathed the space in natural light. As I waited, I took a deep breath to steady myself, trying to project calm confidence. Michael Smith entered the room a few moments later. His presence was commanding, his tall frame and tailored suit exuding professionalism and authority. His dark hair was just beginning to gray at the temples, and his sharp gray eyes scanned the room before meeting mine. His manner was brisk, and his focus seemed unwavering, giving the impression of someone used to making quick but decisive judgments. He reviewed my resume in silence for a moment before beginning the interview. His questions were precise and direct, covering my experience working with children, my education, and my ability to manage responsibilities. I explained my time working at a school, how I handled various challenges, and my experience raising my daughter alone. He listened carefully, occasionally pausing to jot down notes or ask clarifying questions. When he inquired about my personal life, I mentioned my 5-year-old daughter. Although I braced for a negative reaction, it became clear that her presence might actually be a point in my favor. His son, Alex, had become increasingly withdrawn since losing his mother, and Smith seemed to see value in the idea of Alex interacting with another child. The conversation shifted to logistics, and I outlined the time I would need to wrap up my current commitments and arrange for my apartment. Smith's demeanor remained measured, his tone indicating approval. After the interview, Sarah gave me a tour of the home. The mansion was both modern and welcoming, with spacious rooms and carefully chosen details that balanced functionality with warmth. The playroom was particularly striking, filled with books, toys, and puzzles, but it was empty until Alex appeared. He was a quiet, reserved boy, his dark hair and gray eyes bearing a striking resemblance to his father. At first he seemed hesitant, but as I spoke to him, he began to show faint signs of interest and curiosity. By the time I left the Smith house, my mind was racing with possibilities. The job felt like an incredible opportunity, not just for me, but for Emily as well. It seemed like a chance for stability, a fresh start, and perhaps even a small piece of the life I dreamed of giving her. The Smith mansion was more than impressive. It was overwhelming. Every detail of the interior radiated luxury, from the marble floors to the intricate woodwork. It felt surreal to step into a space so far removed from the modest apartment Emily and I had been living in. When Sarah showed me the part of the house that would be ours, I could hardly believe it. We were given an entire wing on the 2nd floor. 2 bedrooms, a cozy sitting room, and a private bathroom. It was more space than I'd ever imagined we could have. Alex, Michael Smith's son, was a thin, timid boy, the spitting image of his father. At first, he kept his distance, answering my questions with short, polite phrases. But when I asked him about his favorite books, he began to open up. It turned out that he, like Emily, loved stories about magic and adventure, particularly Harry Potter. By the end of our conversation, I could see a flicker of excitement in his gray eyes, and I knew there was hope for building a connection. That evening, I signed the contract. As I left the house and drove back to our apartment, I still couldn't believe it was happening. For the first time in years, it felt like life was turning around. The week that followed was a whirlwind of activity. I found tenants for my apartment, packed our belongings, and prepared Emily for the big change. She was thrilled when I told her about the new house and the almost brother she would have. Her excitement was contagious, and it helped ease my nerves about the transition. On our first day, we arrived at the Smith mansion early in the morning. Sarah greeted us warmly and showed us to our rooms, pointing out where to find everything we'd need. She also explained the household schedule. Michael Smith usually had breakfast at 7 before heading to work. He returned late in the evenings and often worked from his home office into the night. Alex's day was structured with homeschooling, followed by time for outdoor activities or sports in the afternoons. The first few days were challenging. Adjusting to the rhythm of life in such a large house took effort, and I was learning to understand Alex's habits and preferences while also ensuring Emily felt at home. Despite the initial awkwardness, Emily and Alex bonded quickly. They spent hours playing, drawing, and reading together. Slowly, Alex began to emerge from his shell. He started sharing his thoughts and passions, speaking enthusiastically about space and his dream of becoming an astronaut. I saw Michael Smith only briefly during those early days. He was as busy as Sarah had described, but whenever we crossed paths, he asked about Alex with genuine concern. He listened attentively when I shared updates about Alex's progress and seemed quietly pleased when I mentioned his growing confidence. One evening, about 2 weeks into the job, I stayed later than usual in the children's playroom, reading to both of them. They drifted off to sleep, and I tiptoed out into the dimly lit hallway. As I closed the door softly behind me, I almost collided with Michael. Startled, I took a step back and muttered an apology. He shook his head lightly, offering a smile, a real one, warm and unguarded. It was the first time I had seen him look anything other than reserved or preoccupied. He asked how the children were doing, and I told him about Alex's excitement over becoming an astronaut. He paused, a flicker of surprise crossing his face, and admitted that Alex hadn't spoken so freely about his dreams in a long time. We ended up in the living room, where Michael poured himself a drink and gestured to offer me a glass of wine. I declined, but his manner was relaxed, and for the first time he seemed less like the stoic employer and more like a father trying to find his footing. As he loosened his tie and sank into a chair, he said something that caught me off guard. He admitted he hadn't heard Alex laugh like this in years and credited the change to Emily and me. I felt a rush of emotion at his words. I told him Alex was an extraordinary boy who simply needed patience and kindness. For a moment, Michael's gaze lingered on me, thoughtful and searching, and I sensed there was far more to him than the reserved businessman I had initially met. After losing Julie, his wife, Michael had thrown himself into his work. He believed that by giving Alex the best life, surrounded by every opportunity and comfort, it would be enough. But it hadn't been. The weight of that realization was evident in the way his voice softened as he admitted it. There was an ache behind his words, a quiet grief that seemed to have been locked away for too long. Hearing him reflect on his choices, I felt a pang of empathy. Losing someone you love is an unimaginable burden, but Alex was growing into a remarkable child, kind, thoughtful, and curious. It was clear he had inherited his father's quiet determination. Michael confessed that work had become more of an escape than a responsibility, and for the first time he seemed to question the life he had built around himself. When he asked about my life, I shared everything with him. I spoke of the betrayal that ended my marriage, the debts that had forced me to sell my home, and the life Emily and I had been trying to rebuild. I told him honestly, without embellishment or self-pity, about the struggles and the resilience it had taken to get to where I was. Michael listened without interrupting, his gaze unwavering, and when I finished, there was something in his expression, a mix of respect and understanding. After that conversation, something shifted. Michael started spending more time at home. He joined us for family dinners, made an effort to spend his weekends with Alex, and even suggested outings to the park or the movies. Alex began to thrive under the new attention, his once guarded demeanor softening into an open, joyful spirit. Michael, too, began to change. The tension that had once defined him faded, replaced by a calm warmth that was unmistakable. He laughed more, smiled more, and often played with Alex and Emily, immersing himself in their world of games and imagination. The house, which had once felt too large and impersonal, now echoed with the sounds of life. One morning, I found Michael in the kitchen, attempting to make pancakes. It was a scene that was both endearing and slightly chaotic. He looked utterly out of his element, with batter streaked across the counter and even a smudge on his cheek. He had wanted to surprise Alex for his birthday by continuing a tradition Julie had started. She had always made pancakes for Alex's special day, and Michael was determined to keep the memory alive. We worked together to make the pancakes. I showed him how to flip them without tearing them, and he concentrated with almost comical seriousness, trying to mimic my movements. Despite the lightheartedness of the moment, there was an underlying tenderness in the way he committed to the task. Occasionally our hands brushed, and each time I felt my pulse quicken. As the final pancake turned out perfectly golden, Michael turned to me with a rare smile. In that brief moment, standing so close, I noticed the details I hadn't before, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes and the quiet intensity of his gaze. It was a fleeting, meaningful connection that neither of us spoke aloud. The moment passed when Alex ran into the kitchen, his face lighting up at the sight of his father. Michael scooped him up effortlessly, and the room filled with laughter and joy. Later, at breakfast, the four of us sat together: Michael, Alex, Emily, and me. The children devoured pancakes, their chatter filled with excitement about the day ahead. Michael had decided to take a rare day off, and the plans for a trip to the zoo became a highlight for everyone. The day at the zoo was perfect. Alex and Emily marveled at the animals, fed giraffes, and even took pony rides. Michael indulged them with ice cream and balloons, capturing their happiness in candid photos on his phone. On the drive home, as the children slept in the back seat, Michael spoke quietly, thanking me for what he described as a transformation in Alex's happiness. His words carried a sincerity that struck me deeply, and I told him It was his effort that had made the difference. The days that followed seemed to flow seamlessly. Michael worked from home more often, making time to join us for meals and spend evenings with the children. After the kids were in bed, he and I would often find ourselves talking late into the night. Our conversations ranged from books and movies to the dreams we had for our children's futures. With each passing day, I found myself looking forward to those quiet moments, cherishing the bond that seemed to be forming between us. I began to notice the subtle changes in Michael's behavior. The way his eyes seemed to soften when they met mine, the fleeting brushes of his hand against mine when he handed me a cup of coffee, the faint smile that crossed his face when he heard me walking down the hallway. These moments were small, but undeniable. Yet, as they grew in frequency, so did my unease. I couldn't ignore the boundaries that existed between us. I was his employee, the nanny he'd hired to care for Alex. He was my employer, a successful businessman with a life far removed from my own. The gap between our worlds felt insurmountable. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, I passed by Michael's office and found him seated at his desk, absorbed in a collection of old photographs. Hesitating in the doorway, I watched as he stared at an image of a young, radiant woman holding a small child who looked strikingly like Alex. The grief etched on his face was profound, and it drew me closer. The room felt heavy with memories, and as he shared fragments of his life with Julie, I felt the weight of the loss he carried. He spoke of their early years together, of how she had supported him when he was building his first startup, working tirelessly to ensure his dreams could take flight. He recounted the joy they had felt when their efforts paid off, when they bought the house and imagined a future filled with travel and happiness. But that joy had been cruelly interrupted by illness. Cancer had taken her too soon, leaving behind only memories and a son who still needed her. Listening to him, I felt a rush of emotions. His pain was palpable, his vulnerability raw. I reached out, my hand resting gently on his shoulder, offering what little comfort I could. As he turned to face me, there was something in his eyes, something deep, profound, and unspoken. The intensity of the moment left me breathless. From that night on, things began to shift between us. Michael started spending more time with the children and me, joining us for meals and taking us on outings. It was as though a door had opened within him, allowing light and connection to flood into his life once more. The children flourished under his attention, and I found myself drawn further into the warmth of his presence. One morning, I discovered him in the kitchen, attempting to make pancakes for Alex's birthday. The sight of him, a powerful man so utterly out of his depth, brought a smile to my face. Together, we managed to turn the chaos into a celebration, and I found myself growing even closer to him. There was something deeply humanizing about seeing him navigate the simple, messy joy of making breakfast for his son. As he turned to face me, there was something in his eyes, something deep, profound, and unspoken. The intensity of the moment left me breathless. From that night on, things began to shift between us. Michael started spending more time with the children and me, joining us for meals and taking us on outings. It was as though a door had opened within him, allowing light and connection to flood into his life once more. The children flourished under his attention, and I found myself drawn further into the warmth of his presence. One morning, I discovered him in the kitchen, attempting to make pancakes for Alex's birthday. The sight of him, a powerful man so utterly out of his depth, brought a smile to my face. Together, we managed to turn the chaos into a celebration, and I found myself growing even closer to him. There was something deeply humanizing about seeing him navigate the simple, messy joy of making breakfast for his son. Soon after, Michael suggested a weekend trip to the mountains. I hesitated, uncertain about crossing the professional boundaries that still loomed in my mind. But he was insistent, framing the trip as a family getaway for the children. I agreed, though my heart was filled with both anticipation and apprehension. The journey to the mountains was filled with laughter and lightheartedness. The children played games and sang songs, their joy infectious. When we arrived, the cozy lodge nestled among the trees felt like a sanctuary. The air was crisp, the views breathtaking, and the time spent together felt like a gift. During the day, we explored the forest, splashed in the river, and played games on the open meadow. Evenings were spent by the fireplace, sipping hot chocolate and listening to local stories about the region. When the children had fallen asleep, Michael and I ventured out for a quiet walk along the moonlit trails. The intimacy of the moment was undeniable. Under the vast expanse of stars, surrounded by the scent of pine and the gentle rustle of the wind, I felt a closeness to him that I could no longer ignore. He spoke of the changes he had felt since I'd come into his life, how the monotony and grief that had consumed him for so long had begun to fade. I couldn't deny my own feelings. Being with Michael and the children had rekindled something within me that I had thought long gone, a belief in the possibility of happiness and connection. Standing there, in his arms, with the mountains as our silent witnesses, I allowed myself to feel the fullness of that truth. The next day was filled with more laughter and adventure, but beneath the surface, I carried the quiet certainty that my life had been irrevocably changed. What had started as a job had become something far deeper, and as I watched the children's joy and felt the warmth of Michael's presence, I knew that I was no longer just their nanny. I was part of something bigger, a family that had begun to heal together. Life had transformed into a fairy tale I never thought possible. The day we visited the castle and the waterfall felt like a dream. The children fed wild ducks, their laughter echoing in the crisp mountain air, while Michael never left my side. His presence was constant, his hand in mine, his arm around my shoulders whenever the moment allowed. I felt wrapped in a cocoon of warmth, one I didn't want to leave. That evening, Michael surprised me by leading me to the hotel terrace. A table was set for two, adorned with candles, elegant dishes, and wine. I couldn't contain my astonishment at the gesture. It was clear he had gone to great lengths to create something unforgettable. The soft glow of candlelight, the twinkling stars above, and the faint strains of music in the distance made it all feel surreal. As we sat together, he shared his thoughts and dreams for the future. For the first time, he spoke not just about his business, but about his desire to balance it with the life he wanted to build, with me. His words resonated deeply, and when he rose from his seat, I could hardly breathe. In a single fluid motion, he knelt before me and revealed the small velvet box in his hand. The world seemed to stand still as he spoke, his voice steady but filled with emotion. The diamond ring sparkled in the candlelight, but it was his sincerity that truly overwhelmed me. His love for me, for Emily, and his vision of our lives as one family left me speechless. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I nodded, my heart pounding with joy and disbelief. He slipped the ring onto my trembling finger, and as our lips met in a tender kiss, I felt an indescribable sense of rightness, as though the universe had conspired to bring us to this moment. Standing together under the stars, we knew this was the beginning of a new chapter. The next morning, over breakfast, we shared the news with the children. Their excitement was immediate and uncontainable. Emily squealed with joy, already imagining her dress for the wedding, while Alex beamed at the prospect of having Emily as his official sister. Their happiness mirrored our own, and the house buzzed with the energy of a family brought together by love. The weeks that followed were a blur of planning and preparation. Michael insisted I step away from my role as a nanny, calling it unnecessary now that I was to be his wife. Instead, I embraced my new role as part of the family, focusing on creating a home where joy and laughter could flourish. Together we planned the wedding, choosing to return to the same mountain lodge where he had proposed. It seemed only fitting to begin our life together in the place where it had all come full circle. The world around us, of course, had its opinions. Whispers circulated about the unlikely pairing of a wealthy entrepreneur and a former nanny. But those murmurs faded in the face of the truth we knew. What we had was real, and nothing could diminish the love that had grown between us. Michael changed in ways that left me in awe. He worked less, laughed more, and invested his energy into creating memories with our family. Weekend outings, movie nights, and impromptu adventures became the norm. Emily adored his playful side, while Alex blossomed under his father's newfound attentiveness. Watching them together was like witnessing a piece of art come to life. A week before the wedding, we took the children shopping for their outfits. Emily twirled in princess-like gowns, her laughter infectious, while Alex insisted on a suit that matched his father's perfectly. The joy in their eyes reflected everything I felt in my heart. That evening, as we sat in the garden under a blanket of stars, Michael reached for my hand. He spoke of happiness, the kind that comes not from ambition or wealth, but from the people who fill your life with meaning. As his words settled over me, I realized how profoundly my life had changed. What had started as a job had turned into a journey of love, resilience, and hope. In that moment, with the scent of blooming flowers in the air and the warmth of his hand in mine, I understood that this was only the beginning. Our story had been rewritten, and together we were building a future filled with love, laughter, and endless possibilities. When he told me how much I had brought light back into his life, his voice was quiet but filled with sincerity. Leaning against his shoulder, I felt my heart swell with emotions I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. My own journey had been no easier. When my husband left me and Emily with nothing, I thought I'd never trust anyone again. My life became about survival, about ensuring my daughter had what she needed. But Michael had changed all of that. He brought back my faith in people, in love, and most importantly, in myself. With him, I had learned to dream again, to open my heart to hope and happiness. Our wedding felt like a fairy tale come to life. The hotel where Michael proposed was transformed into a floral wonderland, with guests arriving from all corners of the country to celebrate with us. Emily, radiant in her flower girl dress, scattered rose petals ahead of me, while Alex, solemn and proud, carried the rings on a small velvet cushion. When Michael saw me in my wedding dress, his eyes brimmed with tears. In that moment, I knew we had found in each other everything we had ever dreamed of. The reception was a blur of joy and laughter. Alex delivered a heartfelt toast that brought tears to the eyes of every guest. He spoke about how he now had not only a father, but also a mother and a sister, and how it had made him the happiest he had ever been. Emily chimed in with her own words, calling Michael the best father in the world and expressing her gratitude for the family we had become. Their words cemented the love that had brought us all together. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the children had fallen asleep, Michael and I stood on the same terrace where he had proposed. The moonlight glinted off the wedding band now on my finger, and I felt overwhelmed by the beauty of it all. This was more than just a wedding. It was the beginning of a new chapter in our lives, one filled with love, trust, and endless possibilities. The year that followed brought even more happiness. One warm summer evening, we were all gathered in the garden. Alex and Emily chased fireflies under the fading light, their laughter filling the air. I sat beside Michael, leaning against his shoulder, as he wrapped an arm around me. My hand rested on my growing belly, a reminder that soon our family would grow even more. The life we had created together felt complete in a way I never thought possible. Michael whispered how grateful he was for every moment we shared, for the love that had brought us together and made us whole. I echoed his sentiment, my heart full of gratitude for the second chance life had given us. It was then that I realized something important. Fairy tales aren't about perfection. They're about the courage to believe in happiness again, even when life seems darkest. Our story wasn't perfect, but it was ours.